This is the review for the Chapter 12, Quiz 2. I would strongly recommend participating. When we take a look at this, rewrite each radical by putting it into simplest radical form. Remember, when you do these type of questions, you are looking for perfect squares. You're looking to factor out perfect squares from these questions. Go ahead and try 1, 2, 3, and 4, please. Rewrite each radical by putting it into simplest radical form. Remember, you're looking for perfect squares. What numbers go into these that are perfect squares? By the way, the 23 questions that we're going to do right now look exactly like the questions on your quiz. All right, they look exactly like the questions on your homework as well. So when we take a look at number 1, what times what is 400? Well, 400 is actually a perfect square. So we can cross off the 400, bring out a 20 because 20 times 20 is 400. Be very careful right here. You will not get full credit if you just put 20. You have to put, remember, anytime you take the square root of a number, it's a plus or minus 20. Again, that symbol, you will have to copy and paste it in Schoology into your answer from the question. So that's plus or minus 20. That's a perfect square. 18, however, is not a perfect square. 18 is really 9 times 2. 9 is a perfect square. Cross off the 9, bring out the 3. So this turns into 3 radical 2, but it's not 3 radical 2. It is plus or minus 3 radical 2. So be very careful there. 600. 600 is really 100 times 6. 100 being a perfect square. Cross off the 100, bring out the 10. So this becomes 10 radical 6, but remember that it is plus or minus 10 radical 6. 15. Well, what times what is 15? Well, 1 and 15, 3 and 5. Neither 3 nor 5 is a perfect square. This one, because nothing goes into it that is a perfect square, can't be simplified. You will have one like this on your quiz and on your review. You just write the words can't be simplified. Questions on any of those 4? Let's take a look at the next set. All right, the next set says solve each quadratic equation by factoring. So what you want to do is you want to do what times what equals 12. That adds up to -8. So you're going to put that inside parentheses. And then what you're going to do is once you get what's inside the parentheses, you're going to draw a line down the middle and set each side equal to 0. Go ahead and try number 5, please. And then you got to solve that equation after it. So what times what is 12? That adds up to -8. Remember that anytime that you have a positive C value here, but a negative B value, it has to be a minus and a minus because a negative times a negative is a positive, but a negative plus a negative gives you a negative. So we're going to have X and X, and then what times what is 12? That adds up to -8. It is -6 and -2. So now what you want to do is take each of those things inside parentheses and set them equal to 0 and solve. So this is just a one-step equation, +6 + 6. So we get X equals 6. Over here, we have plus 2 and plus 2. So we have x equals 2. It does not matter, by the way, if you did instead x minus 2 and x minus 6. That's the same thing, all right? Both answers will be accepted, whether you put the x equals 6 on one side or the other and the x equals 2 on one side or the other. When you take a look at question number 6, the first thing that you want to do is get rid of this minus 16. We want to get that 16 over to the other side. So plus 16 and plus 16. So now we have x squared equals 16. Remember, when we're solving the quadratic by factoring, what we want to do is we want to solve for x. So now that you have x squared equals a number, remember the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So then you take the square root, 16 is a perfect square. So the square root of x squared is just x. The square root of 16, be very careful here. This is one of the spots that you're going to make a mistake on your quiz. Don't forget that that is plus or minus 4. If you just put 4, you're only putting one of the two answers because your two answers are really 4 and negative 4. So be very, very careful there. But what we want to do, because it's a perfect square, 16, we want to add it to the other side, then just take the square root of each side. Number 7 is a very, very similar question. Again, we want to set it equal to 0 first. We want to set it equal to 0 first by doing plus 14 and plus 14 first. So that means we really have 2x squared plus 16x plus 14 equals 0. Now what you want to do is exactly what we did in question number 5 here. We want to do the parentheses. We want what times what is 14. That adds up to 16. However, notice that you have a 2 as your a value. So that means we have to do a 2x and an x. So whatever number you put over here, you have to multiply it by 2 before adding it to the middle number to give you 16. So really what you're looking for are factors of 14. But again, whatever number you put here, you have to multiply it by 2 before adding it to the middle. Go ahead and try and finish number 7, please. So what times what is 14? It is 7 and 2. But we have to be careful where we put the 7 and where we put the 2. By putting the 2 there and putting the 7 there, we're doing 2 times 7, which is 14, plus 2, which gives us 16. If we put those reversed, we'd have 2 times 2, which is 4. 4 plus 7 does not give you 16. Now that we have our parentheses, now we want to draw our line down the middle and set both sides equal to 0 and solve. So 2x plus 2 equals 0 and x plus 7 equals 0. This is just a two-step equation. So minus 2 minus 2. So 2x equals negative 2. Divide by 2, divide by 2, you get x equals negative 1. And on this side, minus 7 minus 7. So we have x equals negative 7. So your two answers are negative 1 and negative 7. Number 8 is sort of a unique question. Notice that you don't have a C value. When you don't have that C value, what you want to do is factor out the greatest common factor. What the greatest common factor of 3x squared and 9x is 3x. I can factor out a 3 from each of those, and I can factor out an x from each of those. So if I take out a 3x, what I'm left with here is an x, and what I'm left with here is a minus 3. You can always check that by redoing the distributive property. 3x times x gives you 3x squared. 3x times minus 3 gives you negative 9x equals 0. In this one now, what you're going to do is draw your line down the middle and set both sides equal to 0. I know that we did this a long time ago, it seems like. And now you just solve it. All right, you just solve it like a normal equation. This is just a one-step equation. Divide by 3, divide by 3. So x equals 0. And then we have plus 3 and plus 3. So x equals 3. Again, this video is probably going to be something that when you're working on your review, when you're working on your quiz, you're going to want to go back and revisit. Your review and your quiz are set up just like these. So these are really, really good examples to go back to. In the next one, solve each quadratic equation. Leave your answer, notice what this one says, in simplest radical form. So we don't have to take it one step further and change it into a decimal. We're just going to leave it in simplest radical form. Go ahead and try question number 9, please. Solve for x. Solve for x. We're not using the quadratic formula yet. We're just solving for x. We're not using the quadratic formula yet. We're not using negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We're not using that yet. So in number 9, we want to get that x all by itself. So plus 27 plus 27. So we have x squared equals 27. Square root, the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. Well, what times what is 27? Remember, we're putting it in the simplest radical form. 9 times 3 is 27. 9 being a perfect square. Cross off the 9, bring out the 3. So this is x equals plus or minus 3 radical 3. Again, be very careful on these not to forget the plus or minus in front when you take the square root of something. If you only put 3 radical 3 as your answer, you're only putting one of the two answers because you need the negative 3 radical 3 as well. In question number 10, remember that the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So the very first thing that you want to do is take the square root of both sides. Go ahead and try question number 10, please. So this opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So this is just x minus 3 equals the square root of 12. Now 12 can really be simplified. 12 is 4 times 3, 4 being a perfect square. Cross off the 4, bring out the 2. So what we really have is x minus 3 equals plus or minus 2 radical 3. That is not in simplest form yet, all right? We have to get the x all by itself. So we need to, well, we're not going to do that yet. We're going to split it right here. All right, so we're going to have x minus 3 equals 2 radical 3, and x minus 3 equals negative 2 radical 3. Now you need to solve that. So plus 3 and plus 3 plus 3. Those cancel out, those cancel out. So we have x equals 2 radical 3 plus 3. And we have x equals negative 2 radical 3 plus 3. When you go to type these into Schoology, you are not going to type any spaces in between any of this. You're just going to do 2 square root symbol 3 plus 3 and negative 2 radical 3 plus 3. In question number 11, this one gets a little bit more complicated. We don't want to do the square root first like we did this. We need to get rid of this minus 40, and we need to get rid of the divided by 2. You have to get rid of the minus 40 first. So plus 40 and plus 40 first. That way we're simplifying it a little bit more because eventually we want to take the square root. So that equals 108. And then this is 2 times this whole thing. So we want to get rid of the times by dividing by 2 and dividing by 2. We want to try and get it to look like number 10. All right. So then we have x minus 5 squared equals 54. Now it's just like the previous question. Go ahead and try the rest of this one on your own, please. The opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So we have x minus 5 equals plus or minus radical 54. 54 can be simplified. 54 is 9 times 6 is 54. Cross off the 9, bring out the 3. So this is really plus or minus 3 radical 6. Just like in the other one, we now want to split it and split it. So x minus 5 equals 3 radical 6, and x minus 5 equals negative 3 radical 6. Plus 5 plus 5, plus 5 plus 5 to get that x all by itself. And we get x equals 3 radical 6 plus 5 and negative 3 radical 6 plus 5. Those would be your 2 answers. So again, these are not easy for the most part. This is probably a slide that you probably want to refer back to. I also have this in the notes in Schoology. Take a look at the next 3 questions. All right, determine the unknown value that would make each trinomial a perfect square. When you are looking for the C value, here, what you want to do is you want to take half of the B value and then square it. You want to take half of the B value and then square it. So half of 16 is 8. 8 squared is 64. Let's skip 13 for now. Go ahead and try 14. It's just like number 12. Take half of your B value and then square it. Half of negative 12 is negative 6. Squaring the negative 6, again, be very careful. Remember, whenever you square a negative number, if you go to type it into the calculator, you have to put parentheses. So parentheses negative 6 squared is negative 6 times negative 6, which is positive 36. When you're looking for the B value here, what you want to do is, this is a perfect square. All right, the C value is a perfect square. So you want to take the square root of your C value and then multiply it by 2. All right, you're basically doing the opposite of this. You're taking the square root of 144. Square root of 144 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. You will have 3 questions just like this. Again, take half of the B value and square it. or square root it and multiply it by 2. They're opposites of each other. The next type of question is completing the square. They love this type of question on your Regents exam. Solve each quadratic equation by completing the square. Now, when you go to complete the square, we're going to round our answer to the nearest tenth. So when you go to do this, remember the first thing that you want to do is get your C value over to the other side. So we want to do minus 11 and minus 11 first, so that we have x squared plus 8x equals negative 11. Now what you want to do, this is the key part, all right? This is the key part right here. We want to look at our b value. We want to, just like on the previous questions, we want to take half of our b value and then square it. So half of 8 is 4. Then we want to square it. That gives us 16. What we want to do is we want to add that number to both sides of the equal sign, because we're creating a trinomial that is a perfect square. So now we have x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals 5. This trinomial is a perfect square now. What times what is 16? That adds up to 8. Well, it would be 4 and 4. You'd have x plus 4 and x plus 4. That's taking place of the trinomial. Well, an easier way to write x plus 4 times x plus 4 is just x plus 4 squared. Bring down your equals 5. Now this problem looks exactly like this type of problem did, all right, that we had before. It looks exactly like this type of problem that we had before. So now we just want to solve that. So we want to take the square root, take the square root. So we have x plus 4 equals plus or minus radical 5. That is not a perfect square. We can't simplify it at all. What we want to do is we're finding it to the nearest tenth. So we want to split it into 2. X plus 4 equals radical 5. X plus 4 equals negative radical 5. We want to find the decimal equivalent of this. So we're going to do minus 4 and minus 4 to get the x all by itself. Those 4s cancel out. All that you would have to type into the calculator, you would have to do second square root button 5. Make sure that you tab out of the square root symbol and then do minus 4. When you do that, you get negative 1.8 here. In this one, we would do negative square root symbol 5. Make sure that you tab out of the square root symbol, do minus 4, and you would get negative 6.2 when you round to the nearest tenth. Go ahead and try number 16. It's just like number 15. Go ahead and try number 16, please. I know that you might not be done, but I'm sort of worried about time here. We're going to do minus 63 and minus 63 first. So x squared minus 16x equals negative 63. We want to take half of our b value and then square it. So half of negative 16 is negative 8. Squaring that negative 8, negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 64. That's what we want to add to both sides, plus 64 and plus 64. So now I have x squared minus 16x plus 64 equals, this would be positive 1. What we did was we created a perfect square trinomial. What times what is 64? That adds up to negative 16. This would be negative 8 and negative 8. I can rewrite that by doing x minus 8 squared equals 1. Remember, once you get to this point, what you want to do is just like how we did in those previous questions. To get rid of the squared, we need to do the square root and square root. So we have x minus 8 equals, now the square root of 1 is a perfect square. So I could just say that it is plus or minus 1 because the square root of 1 is 1. So square root it plus or minus 1. So now we want to split it into 2. X minus 8 equals 1. X minus 8 equals negative 1. Plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8. Cancel out, cancel out. So I have x equals 9. And negative 1 plus 8 is 7. So I get 9 and 7. Those are very difficult questions. Again, you might want to refer back to this video, to this part. You might want to look at the hard copy of notes in Schoology as well. In the next parts, this is the quadratic formula stuff, the stuff that we did this week. So the formula is right there for you. Remember that the number in front of your x squared is your a, the number in front of the x is your b, the number here is your c. However, remember you need it set equal to 0. So the first thing that you need to do here is minus 1 and minus 1 because we need it set equal to 0. All right, so our c value here is really a minus 4 or negative 4. So be very, very careful there. When we go to plug it into the formula, we have negative b, so negative 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 8 squared, minus 4 times a times c. Make sure that you use that correct c value of negative 4, all over 2 times a, 2 times 5. So when you go to type this part into the calculator, 8 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 4, you actually get 144. So we have negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 144 over 10. 144 is a perfect square. That's really 12 times 12. So we have negative 8 plus or minus 12 all over 10. Now we want to split it. Negative 8 plus 12 divided by 10. Negative 8 minus 12 divided by 10. Now you just got to figure out those answers. Negative 8 plus 12 is 4. 4 divided by 10 is 0.4. If we had to take it into simplest radical form, all right? That would actually be simplest radical form because we had to take the square root there. Negative 8 minus 12 is negative 20. Negative 20 divided by 10 is negative 2. So we would have 0.4 and negative 2. I know it's a little bit confusing because it says simplest radical form, but we had to simplify that radical. 144 simplified is 12. So you actually have to keep on taking it down to the decimal there. Go ahead and try this one, please. Same exact type of question. Put your answer in simplest radical form. Make sure that you realize that you have to do minus 6 and minus 6 first, because when you do these quadratic formula problems, it has to equal 0. So subbing these in, we would have the negative of -3 plus or minus -3 inside parentheses squared. All right, you could type this whole thing into the calculator, -4 times 2 times -6. And you get a 57 there. So we have 3 plus or minus the square root of 57. 57 cannot be simplified. All right, so all that we're going to do is split it right here. We would have 3 plus the square root of 57 over 4, and we would have 3 minus the square root of 57 over 4. 57 can't be simplified. The next type of questions, you are putting these in simplest radical form again. So go ahead and try this one. Now in this one, again, we want it equal to 0. So the first thing that we need to do is -7x and -7x, because we need this equal to 0. So be very careful. We need to put this in order. The b value goes in the middle there. Don't put the -7 towards the end and accidentally think that it is the c value. So it would be -x squared minus 7x minus 13. I am quickly running out of time. When you go to sub this in, this is what it would look like. When you go to do the green part and type that part into your calculator, make sure that you put -7 inside parentheses. You get a -3 inside the square root symbol. That -3 should set off all sorts of bells and whistles for you. All right, that -3 means that that is an imaginary number. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. Therefore, this one is no solution. All right, that's what you actually type, is no solution when you have the square root of a negative number, because it's imaginary. You can't do that. That is no solution. Here is the next one. I'm just going to do this one for you because we are quickly running out of time. We would have the negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 8 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So we would have -8 plus or minus. When you type that into the calculator, it's the square root of 24 all over 2. 24 can be simplified. 24 is really 4 times 6. Cross off the 4, bring out the 2. So this is really -8 plus or minus 2 radical 6 over 2. Be careful. This is triangle reducing right here. 2 goes into -8, 2, and 2. So we can divide each of those by 2 and triangle reduce it. -8 divided by 2 is -4. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So this would just become a radical 6. If you put 1 radical 6, it would not be wrong. And that's all over 1. Now, technically, the all over 1, you don't need the over 1 because it's over 1. But if it was over 2 or 3 or something like that, you would need to put that. So our answer is, when we split it, it would be -4 plus radical 6 and -4 minus radical 6. These would be our two answers. You could put the whole thing over 1 if you wanted to as well, and it would not be wrong. The last type of questions that you're looking at is, how many solutions do these have? Remember, what you want to do is b squared minus 4ac for all of those. So b squared -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. When you do that, you get an answer of 0. Now, it is very, very tempting to say that 0 is no solution. 0 is not no solution. When you get 0 for the discriminant, 0 for the discriminant is 1 solution. B squared -1 squared minus 4 times 1 times -2. When you type that into the calculator, you get 9. When you get a positive number like that, any positive number is 2. solutions. And then here we would have b squared. We don't have a b value there, so it's really 0 squared minus 4 times a times c, 1 and 1. When you type that into the calculator, you get -4. Anytime that you have a negative number is when it's no solution, because just like in the previous problem where you had the negative underneath the square root symbol, that was an imaginary number. You can't do it. That's what your quiz looks like. That's what your homework looks like. If you need help, please ask. All right, but please make sure that you do this. Have a good day.